Fearless Women is sponsored by the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission.
Hi, my name is Mary Robinette Kowal. I'm the author of Calculating Stars and the Lady Astronaut series. You are joining me in the room that I usually write in. This is in the home that my grandfather built in East Tennessee. There's a writing desk built into the corner here. And yes, there is a bed right here, which is great for naps, and often also a small cat joining me, although probably not today. My most recent book is called The Relentless Moon. It's technically book 3, although I try to think of it as a standalone. It is set in an alternate history in 1963. 11 years before this, a meteorite, an asteroid, slammed into Washington, D.C. and kicked off the space program fast and early and very hard. And it's at a time when computers are still women. So if you want to send a computer into space, you have to send women, which means that at this point in the timeline of this universe, there's an established colony on the moon with about 300 people. It's with people from all over the planet. It's men and women working in space, trying to build a new future for humanity. And in the midst of this, there's a lot of civil unrest because it's also taking place at the same time the civil rights movement is happening in our real world. And with the added pressures of this enormous climate change that is happening because of the meteorite strike. So it's a time of unrest. It's a time of hope. And what you wind up with in The Relentless Moon is basically a locked room spy thriller in space. When I was thinking about what novel I wanted to tackle next in this Lady Astronaut universe, one of the things that kept nagging at me was what was happening on Earth and the moon. This is a parallel novel. There's another novel, The Fated Sky, that takes place as my series protagonist, Elma York, is on her way to Mars. But I refer back to a lot of things that are happening on Earth. I refer back to riots. I refer back to political unrest. And I was like, what's going on there? And so I wanted to really dig into that. And the other thing I would say is that I very much, as a reader, like ensemble casts. I really enjoy heist films or movies or books because I like the way different people can bring their strengths into a thing. So doing something that is a political thriller gave me an opportunity to look at the way this kind of situation affects a lot of people across a gamut of society, but also in this very tight-knit, closed community, because, when you're on the moon, there's literally nowhere to run. So it gave me all kinds of opportunities to sort of really dig in and play with how we react to catastrophe and stress, and some of the nobler impulses that we often have, even when it's at a time when it seems like we should be at our most selfish. When I was thinking about who I wanted to center in these novels, Elma York, Nicole Wargan, the fact that I wanted to call it the Lady Astronaut novels, the thing to understand is that I grew up watching people in space. I was born in 1969 and saw man land on the moon. Granted, I'm 6 months old at the time. My parents are very proud of the fact that I could sit up, but still, my first moment where I'm really, really conscious of the space program, aside from just like, oh yeah, people go into space, is when Sally Ride goes up. And looking back at the history of this and thinking about how long it took us to send someone up, it bothered me. It especially bothers me now that this is a problem that we still have ongoing. And so I wanted to see what it would have been like if we had actually centered women I sometimes say that this is Apollo era science fiction that's women centered. I wanted to read Ray Bradbury, but with 100% more women and people of color. That's what I wanted. I wanted that sense of golden age adventure, but I wanted to be there. And so I created this world. And it's interesting that I felt like the only way I could actually plausibly get women into space in the 1950s and 60s was to slam a giant asteroid into the planet. Anytime you're talking to anyone, it's important to understand that we are not writing in a vacuum, that there is always something, some seed, some influence. Ray Bradbury has been a huge influence on me because of the lyrical is not the right word because I don't think that his stories are meant to be sung, but they're meant to be spoken. There is a beauty to his language that is both poetic and also very grounded. And I have just always admired and loved his writing. So the genesis for Elma York is actually a novelette called um, The Lady Astronaut of Mars. And in that, I was supposed to start with a famous first line. And you're going to think, she's going to talk about a famous first line of Ray Bradbury's. No, it was actually the first line of Wizard of Oz. But what I wanted to do was to do a Bradbury homage using this framework. Every character in The Lady Astronaut of Mars is named after a Ray Bradbury character. The Martian Chronicles was such a it's just such a beautiful, beautiful book. Or, suppose it's what we call a fix-up novel, which means that it's a selection of short stories that he wove a through line into, but it's just so imaginative. And it was based on what they thought and knew about Mars at the time. Like when he was writing it, yeah, he was stretching things, but he wasn't actually completely violating their fundamental understanding of Mars at the day. Obviously, it is violating ours now, but I was like, what would happen again if he were writing that kind of fiction, but with our understanding of Mars now? What sort of future, what sort of world and the inhabitants would that look like if he knew what Mars was actually like? And so that's the kind of thing that I wanted to play with, like what would it be like if we were sending people to Mars in the 1950s and 60s with the knowledge that we have now? What would it be like if we were going to live on the moon? And again, I've said this already, but what would it be like if there were 100% more women and people of color? And that's basically what I wrote the thing that I wanted to read. So when I think about ingenuity and American ingenuity, I have two thoughts. One is that most of the people that were most ingenious that we hold up um, are immigrants or the children of immigrants. And it is so easy to forget that when we talk about being American and American exceptionalism and American ingenuity, that our country is founded on two things that other countries don't have. Um, One is a great shame, which is our long legacy of. And I actually, you know what? I take that back. I shouldn't say that other countries don't have this because our long legacy of colonialism is a long legacy throughout the planet. But it's impossible to think about America without remembering that that's part of what we're built on, and that part of that ingenuity comes from people who have been oppressed, figuring out how to get around that oppression. That's what drove a lot of people to leave England and come here. Um, and then there were a lot of people who were forcibly brought here who had to use their own ingenuity to find ways to live and survive. So when I think about American ingenuity, I don't think about just the inventions that we've made. I think about the changes that we have made to society. I think about the ways in which our hope for a better future causes us to push against boundaries. I think about all of the ways in which we have both uplifted each other and also created barriers for each other that have driven us to have ingenuity, which is perhaps not the answer that anyone is actually looking for, but it is what I think about when I think about American ingenuity. So I write hard science fiction, which means that it is rooted in science. And the research that is involved in trying to do something like this is pretty intense because everyone is going to call you on anything you get wrong. The other thing that I have that is a challenge is that I'm also setting it in a historic era, although my mom dies a little bit inside every time I say the 1950s are a historic era. But um, the first thing that I do is I do very broad research. And then I get in touch with my reference librarian for some specific things. But the other thing that I do is I reach out to subject matter experts. With these books in particular, I had lined up a science consultant who was on board with me for the entire process, and that was Stephen Grenade. Then I also reached out to NASA and to some other people in the rocket science industry, aerospace industry. So I got access to these amazing opportunities. People are incredibly generous with their time and knowledge, and I'm so fortunate. I had um, three different astronauts consulting on the most recent book, The Relentless Moon. Um, Chell Lindgren, Katie Coleman, and Jeanette Epps all gave me their insight. And what's fascinating is in a pool of people, I think there are 36 active astronauts right now, and they all have wildly different experiences about some things, and then exactly the same response to other things. Like, what is space like? The sense of wonder is consistent, and the sense of this is one planet, and and it is fragile and needs to be protected and cherished, and all of the people on it. That is something that is consistent every time I talk to an astronaut. So it's interesting seeing where those similarities are and where the differences are in their experience. I've gotten to talk to rocket scientists, orthopedic surgeons, flight surgeons. It's been one of the most delightful times that I've had. Really, what I tell people is that I'm just indulging my natural curiosity. And if I have to write a novel in order to be invited to NASA to go to the Neutral Buoyancy Lab to watch an entire practice spacewalk, thank you. Yes, I will. I will. How many novels would you like me to write? When I started writing Relentless Moon, it was before we were in the middle of a pandemic. There was unrest, but no more than usual. So when I'm thinking about The Relentless Moon now, it is a very different book than the one that I wrote, even though it is, of course, completely unchanged. The thing that I think I would want readers to take away from this book now, which is not the thing that I necessarily wanted when I wrote it, is understanding that the reason it seems timely is that these are patterns that repeat throughout history. I was writing about the civil rights move. Actually, no, I was writing about going to the moon, but I was not ignoring the fact that it was set during the civil rights movement. And and so I was including the riots that would happen. I was also thinking about the way we respond to catastrophe, and we respond to catastrophe in this kind of spectrum. On one end, you have the first immediate response of most people is a desire to help. And then on the other end, what you have is fear and a desire to protect what is your own. And most of us exist somewhere in the middle, but it's very easy to fall to one extreme or another. Although I don't think that the desire to help is necessarily an extreme to be avoided. But it is interesting how often, when you look back at history, that choice about where we land culturally and as individuals is often shaped by someone that we admire, someone who is a tone setter, someone who's in a leadership position. And when you look at the way we've responded to the pandemic globally, you can see the difference that the leader makes in how we respond. So for me, what I would say is that what I want people to remember is that there's more than one possible response, and that when you're at the fear end of the spectrum, to think about what is the kinder choice, what is the choice that is going to uplift everyone. There's this saying, a rising tide raises all ships. I come out of a theater community. Specifically, I'm a professional puppeteer, and the saying that we have is the only competition is a bad puppet show. And what this means is that when someone is encountering something that they haven't experienced before, if their first experience of it is negative, they think, I don't want to experience that ever again, and they will never see another puppet show. But if they go to a puppet show and it's really good, they think, I want more of this. And then they will go actively seek it out. And, this could be something that I was talking about fiction, but really what we're talking about is our interaction with other people. If someone's first encounter with how to respond to something is something that makes them feel good, if it's something positive, they're gonna seek out more of that. And that's something that we as individuals have some control over. It's not to say that that is the only response. um, Anger and fighting are absolutely necessary and sometimes the only way to make change happen. Like the riots that were happening were because people weren't listening. And when I look at what is happening now, which is such a parallel to what I was writing, the thing that I the thing that is difficult but important to understand is the reason that we are having riots now is because we haven't been listening. Because the fundamental problem that we were addressing during the civil rights movement wasn't addressed. It's still a problem. And this is why this cyclical thing happens, why this feels like history is repeating itself, because it is, because we have not listened. So we have an opportunity to listen and to try to make that kinder choice. And also, sometimes that kinder choice is to support the people who are doing the very hard work of fighting. One of the things that I put into the book was something that I had planned on being uh, a secret and like spoiler land, and I didn't want people to know, and that's a polio outbreak on the moon. And let me tell you that the difference in the way I responded to the pandemic, having written about the polio outbreaks and researched them heavily, is pretty profound. I think that I probably would have been doubtful and hedged my bets early on. Uh, but having written about the polio outbreaks, my first immediate response was, we are listening to the scientists and we are putting our masks on and we are social distancing because we are going to take this really seriously. People talk about the Spanish flu, and that's a great example of how it affected the entire planet. Polio, on the other hand, is a really good example of what happens when you have a silent carrier, when you can be asymptomatic and still spreading the disease, and more importantly and terrifyingly, both polio and what we are learning about COVID-19, there are lasting effects. It was one of the reasons that polio was so terrifying, was that you would have polio, and then when you survived it, you would have lasting, lifelong uh, compromised health. Sometimes it was very obvious with limb paralyzation. But the other thing that you got was something that's called post polio syndrome, which is that 20 years later, polio can come back. And people who didn't even know that they had it as a kid now have symptoms and are weakness and chronic fatigue and paralysis turning up. So with COVID-19, I'm like, when the moment I heard that there was lung scarring, even in people who are asymptomatic, I was like, we are not messing around with this disease. We are not taking a chance on catching it, because there is no telling what that future looks like. So one of the things that is fascinating about being a science fiction writer who works in historical things is that my basic brain is look at history and then map what the future could be. And so when I look at polio and I look at COVID and I map what a potential future could be, I'm like, I will do everything in my power not to inhabit the dystopic version of this future. And I will make all of the choices that I can possibly make that are under my control to avoid a path in which I might be, or might cause my loved ones to be, dealing with unexpected ramifications 20 years down the line.